Hello and welcome to Pest in Class, expert voices in pest management. Today, I speak with Kathey Palmer and Mary Leveridge of Inova as they identify the top 7 payroll and HR mistakes every pest control business owner needs to know. We'll break down everything from the difference between an employee and a contractor to the secret to building a people first strategy that fuels growth. So get ready and take some notes because you're about to learn how to protect your business. I'm your host, Amanda Salvatore. Let's get into it. Kathey Palmer, you are the Chief Growth Officer, and Mary Leveridge, you are the EVP of Inova. And today we will be discussing the top 7 payroll and HR mistakes field service companies make. Welcome to the show. How about we have each of you say your name and a little hello so our listeners can tell who is who during the interview?
My name is Kathey Palmer, and I'm excited to be here today.
And I'm Mary Leveridge, and I'm even more excited than Kathey.
And I'm the most excited. So amazing.
Absolutely.
Thank you both so much for coming here today. I'm really excited to dive in deep to all of these complications that kind of can arise and come up with some ways to problem solve. But first and foremost, we always like to start with an icebreaker here on Pest in Class. If you could have dinner with one historical or contemporary figure, who would it be and why? Mary, how about you start?
I decided my figure would be Lassie because in my world, dogs are people too. I did have lots of other people that I could think of, but I didn't want to unnecessarily inflate their ego. So I decided just to choose Lassie because I know she's going to be a great dinner guest. She's not going to be cause me any stress. But at my age, a low stress night out is perfect. So Lassie is my choice.
I love this so much. It's honestly the most unexpected answer of maybe the history of this podcast. And also, I'm sure that if Tommy gets stuck in a well, you'll be there to help.
Yeah.
So
If
I'm
there's a
glad that
barn fire, anything like that,
if
right?
anything
Exactly.
happens, Mary is on it. She is ready to take charge. Kathey, how about you?
Well, it's always hard to follow Mary, but and when you first posed this, and I'm thinking historical, I'm a history buff, so I'm thinking Eleanor Roosevelt, but then I thought, nah, doesn't compare with Lassie. So how about what I'd like to say is Tommy Mello, and Tommy Mello is really a legend in our industry, in the field services industry. He's the founder and the CEO of A1 Garage. He's literally started his business in a garage, and now he's a $200 million business with operations across the US. But that's not really what really stood out for me and why I would love to have dinner with Tommy is I have had the opportunity to meet him on several occasions. And the thing that really stands out about him is something that Mary and I are going to talk about today, but that is the emphasis that he puts on employee success and making sure that he puts his people first. It starts from the recruiting aspect. He's always recruiting and he's trying to bring the right people in who have the right attitudes. It's also about the well-being of his employees and technicians, making sure that they can cope not only with the work environment, but what's going on in the world. He sponsors financial wellness for them so that they understand how to work through the pitfalls of inflation and various things going on in the economy. He helps them learn how to balance a checkbook. These are things that are so amazing to me and just shows how with his people first emphasis, it really makes a difference on how your business can grow and expand. So, Tommy, I'm ready for that lunch and dinner invitation anytime you are.
I want
Well,
to
well,
join.
I was gonna say, I'm like, can I come too?
I know.
Tommy is a rock star. He is. So, and I love that. I love that. And we're gonna kind of go into this concept as well a little bit today. So let's get into it. First, let's start by setting the stage. What makes the field service industry particularly vulnerable to payroll and HR mistakes? And what are some example of these that companies experience?
I'll kick us off just say by saying that, the field service industry, the employees are not in an office anywhere. They're all mobile. They're all out, going from job site to job site. It'd be nice if they could just stay in the warehouse and fix something, but that's not their world. And not only that, I mean, even if you have a schedule in the morning, that schedule changes. It's always unpredictable. So you've got, unpredictable schedules. You've got all kinds of different types of pay, whether it's commissions, whether it's overtime, whether it's spiffs or tips. All these different variables create a very complex payroll environment. And, if you're not using some sort of system to track this and you're trying to do all this manually, which we'll talk about a little bit later, it really just opens the door for mistakes. And, that can impact cash flow. It can impact your employees' trust in you and, ultimately your reputation. So yeah, it's an open door for errors with all those given variables.
The only thing I would add is, and it really just compounds what Mary had said, is that the field services businesses, same with home services, is everybody runs a really tight shop. I mean, they know their business, they know how to grow their business, but there are so many other complexities in running the business from an HR perspective, from a payroll perspective. And as we're going to talk about today, there are a lot of pitfalls that people need to be aware of, because you may be running the best business and bringing in new clients, except now you're facing some tax penalties, or you're facing wage and hour penalties and some things that may bring your business down. So just because of the complexity of the business and the things that are going on today, we feel it's very important to just talk about what are those things you should be aware of.
So, how about we talk about these 7 payroll and HR mistakes? How about you lay them out for us and then we'll dive in deeper to each?
So Mary and I came up with 7, and there are probably more, but these are really the ones I think that are gotchas if you're not able to really stay on top of them. So misclassifying workers, we'll spend a lot of time on that. Not tracking your time accurately. The third thing is ignoring prevailing wage and certified payroll. And then the fourth is inaccurate or a delayed tip and commission payments.
So mine are primarily focused on the HR portion of a business. You've got weak HR documentation or poor onboarding. Those things we'll talk more about how that can impact your business and your retention later. You've got non-compliance with state and local labor laws. And then finally, manual data entry errors. So all these things, can affect the business every single day, affects your financial statements, affects ultimately your decision making, and ultimately whether or not you stay in business. So they're all very important, and we'll talk more about each of them.
Yeah, let's dive in. Let's talk about this misclassifying workers. How do you differentiate between an employee and an independent contractor? I'm sure there's a lot of different things you have to navigate when you're separating those two.
Exactly. So we'll talk about that, because you have employees, you do have independent contractors, and they're completely different. And we'll talk about that. You also have misclassification of employees. And some people do it intentionally, some people do it unintentionally. Whether it's an exempt or non-exempt employee really makes a huge difference in how the taxes are paid for that employee, how the wages are paid, if overtime is due. So those are some really key areas. And why does that matter? If you look at just a business in general, if you're not paying your employees properly, you will get caught. I mean, there are penalties regarding that. But the other thing is you're going to erode the trust of your employees. And that's sort of a theme through all of this. If you're making mistakes unintentionally or intentionally, and that's hurting your employees, that's actually going to hurt your reputation significantly. And then back to the people first, we want to make sure that you understand why it's important to pay a great attention to that. But let me just talk a little bit more about what are the differences. So what is an employee? We may all think we know what an employee is versus a contractor, but there are some nuances. An employee is someone who basically they're managed by a supervisor in your business. They wear your uniform. They're out in your truck. They're using your tools. I mean, everything that they're doing, they're following your schedule. That's an employee. Now, a contractor, an independent contractor, they're not working off of a particular schedule, and they're using their own vehicles. They're using their own tools. So those are things that are very different there. So you could compare and contrast. If you look at the classification of employees, an exempt role is a professional, executive, supervisor, administrative, that type of thing. Those are exempt. The non-exempt employees are really what most of your technicians are today. That means they're eligible for overtime. So if anybody is, again, intentionally or unintentionally classifying someone as maybe an admin or even a supervisor, and in fact, they are a technician and should be non-exempt, the employee's going to owe money. the employer is going to owe money. And again, you're going to erode that trust. So that's something you need to be very careful of.
Yeah, I'll just add a couple of things to that. I'm a CPA by trade, and it was always a big question. What's a contractor versus an employee? And Kathey's right about the things that you have to look at. Sometimes in different industries, those lines get a little blurred. And I think this is one of those cases. And, sometimes you'll get auditors who allow some of those blurs, but ultimately you just want to make sure that you're doing it the right way. And why is it that people, it's funny in the payroll world, we hear 1099 employee all the time, which is like a total oxymoron, because you're not a 1099 employee. You're either an employee or you're a 1099 contractor. But they use it all the time. And if you're saying I have a 1099 employee, you're probably misclassifying your employee and they probably should be an employee. Well, why do people do that? Well, there are lots of reasons. I mean, you don't pay FICA and Medicare and unemployment insurance on those contractors. So you don't have to worry about those extra costs. You don't pay benefits for them. So the ease of onboarding and offboarding makes it really nice when you get stuck in a situation where you need additional help. And if someone does leave, you don't have to get them set up for COBRA. You don't have to do all those other things. But how do you get caught? Heard this question so many times. How's anybody going to know? Well, yeah, it may not be easy to get caught, but if you do get caught, it's not good. A lot of times what happens is if IRS ultimately ends up auditing you, they'll go back and reclassify all those earnings as far back as they can to wages. And then you're stuck with paying the employee and the employer portion of the FICA and Medicare. So, it's not just the match portion, it's both pieces. But one of the ways I've seen people get caught is a contractor, probably unknowingly, because we're not talking about super savvy people who, understand the tax code. They'll go to the unemployment office and file for unemployment. And all the Labor Department does is say, well, you've never been reported on the unemployment returns. And next thing you know, the Department of Labor has an audit. And next thing you know, they're notifying IRS. And, one thing leads to another. And all of a sudden, you're in a sticky situation. You just want to be very wary of those things and make sure that you're classifying them correctly. If there's a question mark, they're probably an employee. But yeah, Kathey's right. The exempt versus non-exempt is important too. Sometimes the line between all of that gets blurred. You just have to be very careful because there are penalties involved.
Let's go on to not tracking time accurately. Why is accurate time tracking so challenging for companies?
Not tracking time accurately, and why that is so important is that, it's fraught with all kinds of issues that we just discussed about, but it's a slippery slope. The data could be input incorrectly if you're using a manual timesheet and you're entering that data from the timesheet. Maybe the timesheet was incorrect. So there are a lot of issues related to that. So what's the best thing that you need to do? First of all, we understand that our technicians are on the road. They're in the field. So you need to bring the devices to them. One key device is just your mobile phone. There are so many applications today that allows a technician to clock in, clock out from their mobile phone, change locations, which job that they're on. That can all be done on the mobile. There are also GPS devices. And these aren't expensive solutions. These are very practical solutions that bring the solution to the user, which in this case is the technician. Your office staff is not really a problem. You could still rekeying and having things from timesheets could be an issue. It's mainly with your technical staff. How do you really avoid any issues with that? In addition to getting the right device, is just training your staff, your own employees, as to why it is important that the time is tracked properly, and for the technicians to understand why it's important for them to track their jobs on the road. And I would advise doing regular audits as well, just to make sure that what they say they're doing based on their schedule is what is actually taking place, so that you can avoid a whole lot of pitfalls from that.
A couple of our other industries and places that we talk about different types of technology, people say, there's a problem with getting them to use it. They don't understand the technology. One of the things that we've really found is there's always somebody on the crew or at the shop that is really good at this. And, pulling them up and making them feel valued and say, you know what, Jim is going to be your trainer on the technology, or he knows he really is great at this, so let him show you how. So now you're not just helping other people learn how to use it, you're also making someone else feel very important. And, that creates loyalty and creates trust and creates long-term employees, which is what we really want. But falling back to my accountant habits, I will also add to that when you've got data coming over incorrectly, to Kathey's point, I mean, if you're not doing your job costs correctly, you're getting incorrect financial statements, and that leads to incorrect business decisions. And yeah, the employees are important and you want to get them paid, you want to get them paid correctly, but ultimately you've got to be able to make good financial decisions. And if you're not getting good data, then you can't really do that.
All of this advice seems so simple, but also it is something that can, because it is so simple, because it feels basic to an owner, it's easy to overlook. It's easy for it to become sloppy or to push it aside. So, these are all really great reminders to make sure that you do have that proper data and you are taking care of your employees. Speaking of employees, let's talk about prevailing wages and certified payroll rules. Can you please explain in simple terms what prevailing wages and certified payroll mean for a pest control company?
I'll give you the simple answer and then Mary will provide more detail. But I've been in the payroll business now for 25 years, and prevailing wage and certified payroll used to be very, very localized. I mean, you had a localized union or you had various groups, or you specifically you were a federal contractor or whatever, but it's really broadened now. And why is that? If you have a contract with a federal agency or a state agency or a local or municipality or school or any of these things, you may be subject to having additional requirements when it comes to reporting the wages for those employees. Now, how do you know if you have that or not? You're working with those entities. They have required a contract. There are requirements in that contract. So make sure you understand that. And not all jobs are required to have prevailing wage tracked, but many of them are. The other thing is, I believe, and I've read several things on this of late, is that so many times, and we know this is happening on the federal government standpoint, where we're downsizing federal employees, but also state employees, local. A lot of them are using outside contractors, such as field services or home services companies, to actually do the work that they would have paid full-time employees to do. That's opening up this pool of people who probably in the past were not tracking prevailing wage. They weren't really that sure of that, but now they have this new contract and they need to be careful with that. So that, I think, is all very important with tracking this, but understanding what you're working with. And how can you solve this? Well, there are companies that actually, and this is the only thing I would do. I would never try to do prevailing wage and certified payroll on my own. It's just a huge endeavor, and you don't want to make a mistake, because if you do make a mistake, you could lose a very lucrative contract, or even worse than that. I mean, there are fines and penalties that you might be subject to. So don't do that. But there are companies that have software for this. Now, for instance, we have software that can handle, in most cases, prevailing wage and certified payroll, but there are other companies that have that as well. That would be the first thing I would do before I accepted a government contract or before I went down that path. You would definitely need to understand the tracking required for prevailing wage.
I think everybody would like to understand the tracking mechanism for prevailing wage. It can get very complicated. In simple terms, she's right. It's just the minimum wage, that your hourly rate you're required to pay someone who's working on a government project or a public works project. And certified payroll is just how you report that to show that you're doing it correctly. So it sounds like it should be very simple, but the problem is you've got people who are maybe working on a non-prevailing wage project that morning, and then they shift over into a prevailing wage project later on that afternoon. How do you make sure which of those needs to be included on your certified payroll? Well, that's where this mobile app comes into play, where you can make sure that you're tracking that project cost and the project time accurately. It can get very complicated. The worst case I've ever seen, you're right, you can be not able to bid on any more contracts for sure. But one case I saw, a company had not reported correctly, and not only did they prohibit them from bidding again, but they also withheld their payments until they got their reports correct. And so they'd already paid all their labor costs, but they had to, it was like 6 months they were waiting on their money because they had to go back and redo all their prevailing wage reports. So yeah, it's a tricky business, and I don't want to mess it up. So Kathey's 100% right. Get some professional help.
What is one critical piece of advice? You've given us a few, but what's one critical piece of advice you would give to a company who's just starting to bid on government work to ensure that they don't fall into this trap?
Find a payroll company who
Yeah.
can help you with it. Yeah. Dot your I's and cross your T's before you start spending the money. Then you can make better decisions.
It's a high reward, but a high risk. So you need to be prepared for that.
Let's move on. We have inaccurate or delayed tip and compensation reporting. This is a very specific challenge for many in this industry. What are some of the most common mistakes you see when it comes to tracking and reporting tips and commission?
Tips are not as prevalent as commissions, I think, in the industry, but they still come into play. And the tip reporting is not nearly as complicated as it can be in like the hospitality industry and things like that. But the biggest mistake I see is people just, adding it to their net pay without including it as wages. It's actually subject to FICA and Medicare. It's subject to unemployment insurance taxes, all those types of things. So, if you're doing that and not adding it to their W-2 income, that's a no-no. So you want to make sure that you're doing that correctly. And that's a fairly easy fix. So you just need to know that that's what you're supposed to do. Now, as far as commissions, that gets a little more complicated because we fall back on the idea that, you want employee trust, you want employee credibility. And if you're not paying your commissions correctly, then, obviously you're slowly diminishing that employee trust and credibility over a period of time. But the biggest problem with the reporting and tracking of commissions is, first of all, not paying it in the right pay period. And the reason that's a big problem is because, especially on hourly employees. So if you have an hourly employee who is making you $200 in a week, and then he gets $500 in commission, and that's probably a bad calculation example, but we'll go with it. So let's say out of that $700 that week, he's worked 40 hours. So you're going to divide that $700 by 40 hours to get their hourly rate. And that's what you pay overtime on. So not only if you don't get the commission in the right period, not only are you not paying the commission when the employee is due the commission, you're also not calculating his overtime correctly if he gets paid overtime. So you really want to make sure you're doing that correctly. And once again, that's why it's so important to capture that at the point of sale. Make sure that employee is entering that in your software, wherever that is, and make sure your mobile technology is integrated with payroll. And that way you don't really have to worry about it. It does all those calculations for you.
Let's move on to lack of HR documentation and the onboarding process. This is actually something we've covered many times on the podcast, this onboarding process and how it is it's crucial when it comes to recruitment. What does this typically look like?
First of all, I'll tell you that onboarding sets the tone for your entire employee relationship and can determine whether it's a long-term relationship or a short-term relationship, or at least have some part in that determination. In small to mid-sized companies, what I've seen is many times you have the owner or an office manager doing the onboarding. And they call it a process, but it's really not a process. It's really getting them out there in the field and getting them to work. So it's very chaotic, disjointed. You may have John coming on board doing a group of things, and then you may have Joe coming on board and doing 3 things that are completely different. So that's what happens when you don't have someone who has real HR experience or knowledge kind of doing that. You may not get the policies signed off on, or you may not even tell the employee about the policies. And this just opens the door for litigation, for pay disputes, all kinds of things that could really be diminished or mitigated if you had a really good process in place. And then most importantly, if an employee has unclear job expectations and you haven't sat down and covered their role with them and what you expect of them, they're more than likely going to be an unhappy employee who doesn't really know how they're being evaluated. So all this kind of happens in the first, week or so of your employee coming into the office to get started. I don't mean to say that you've got to hire a $100,000 HR director. I mean, there are solutions out there. Even Inova, we have a product called HR Assist, where you have people you can outsource this to, where we create a streamlined process for you that becomes a digital onboarding process that's consistent, that makes sure that, it mimics a good, correct onboarding process, but also adds to it to make sure you're staying compliant. So all these things can really be outsourced to somebody, and even day-to-day tasks that are not necessarily associated with onboarding, life change events for benefits, all those types of things. But what we really want the owners and the office managers to do is focus on the things that they're good at. They need to focus on training the employees, teaching them how to give great customer service, all those things that an HR director maybe on site could do or could help with. But as far as the grunt work and the day-to-day tasks, you need someone that can really do this efficiently and in a consistent manner. If you're not doing this, I love the term quiet costs. These really impact your quiet costs. Those are the costs that you don't really write a check for, but ultimately you pay because you're losing employees faster. You don't have long-term employees, and all those ultimately affect your customer service. So I think it's really important to have a great onboarding process and a great HR process in general.
How you onboard someone and how you offboard someone tells a lot about the character of the company and the people within that company. And so this is really one of the most important things that you can do with your employees is make that experience modern, thorough, and enjoyable for them. And I will give an example. I mean, for our company, for instance, Mary and I, the company that we work at, we have 280 employees. For every new hire, we go through a very stringent onboarding process that includes calls with the executives within the organization. Every new hire has a call with the CEO of the company, has a call with Mary, has a call with me, with others within the organization. And to a person, they say, regardless of where they came from, whether it was a small company or a large company, they said, never in my life have I spoken to the CEO of our organization on my second day here. And it makes a huge impression. And I always tell them, I said, we get as much out of it as you do because you make a connection immediately. So those are the kinds of little things like that you can do in addition to making sure that you're being compliant and following a course that will make that experience beneficial for both you and your employees.
I love that you do that with Inova, that they get to have these conversations and these new employees. It really shows this level of care and this level of importance when somebody is coming into the company. I love that. That's a really great suggestion. Let's move on now to not staying compliant with state and local labor laws. This to me feels like there is probably a lot of opportunity for complications for a company that operates in multiple states or just across different municipalities. This can really feel like a moving target. What are some of the most frequent challenges or difficult to track labor laws that you see?
It's a huge challenge, especially with a mobile workforce. I mean, you've got a workforce that's out on the road all day long. They could travel between different states, different counties, different cities. And, especially as we're becoming more global, we're more aware of states like California where, they have different paid sick leave requirements. And not only do they have a paid sick leave requirement for the state, almost every city has their own paid sick leave requirement, and they can update it sometimes monthly. So, the federal requirements stay fairly stable. I mean, you may see some changes once a year or so, but the states and those local agencies, a great example of this, overtime and paid sick leave, those are the things that you see most often. And, we've talked a little bit about, the problem with kind of trying to track that data and track where it's happening, all that stuff. But a great example is when you're working on border states, right? So states that border each other, and sometimes you have employees that cross over the state on a daily basis. You may have a good example is California and Nevada. So you may have a customer in California that morning and you work 6 hours there. Then all of a sudden you have an urgent situation and you have to go to another call in Nevada for, 7 and 7. So you've got 14 hours. So the difference is, so California has a daily overtime rule. If you work more than 8 hours, you're going to get paid overtime. So if you work more than in that same day, if you work more than 12 hours, you're going to get paid double time for hours over 12 hours. So you're also still subject to the 40-hour overtime rule. But if you happen to be on your 7th day of work and you're working that day and that all happens, then you get another overtime kick in. So you've got all these things happening in California. So let's say this gentleman starts out, a technician or lady, starts out in California that morning doing their 7-hour job, and then they're about to head home and they get this emergency call. They have to go over to Nevada and work another 7 hours. So had you not been tracking that correctly, you could be subject to a lot of overtime But since it happened in Nevada, you're only subject to the greater than 8 hours overtime. So, it's really important that you're able to manage that GPS location for those employees who are going back and forth between states or between jurisdictions. And that's just one huge example that could really impact your bottom line. So being able to track that in a very seamless manner and then having that flow directly to payroll is crucial.
You went into it a little bit, but would you have any suggestions for how companies can stay organized?
It's really important to not use manual processes. I mean, we've all kind of gotten away from that. I mean, even I now use a Word document to track my to-do list, and I'm probably not, I used to have a little pad I carried around with me, and I realized that's just not doesn't work anymore. So, you've got to come up with ways you can track these things automatically and digitally, and you have vision from and access from every aspect of the company. So, your office manager can see, where is Joe? If you've got to find out, who you can send to another job, you need to be able to see those things. So having a software that really is integrated with your entire organization and that integrates and flows, I mean, this is a perfect world, right? So you got all this data that flows into timekeeping, then it flows into payroll, then it flows into your general ledger, and then you got this great financial statement that shows how much money you made. In a perfect world, all these things happen seamlessly. It takes work to get there, but having a partner that will help you bite off a little bit of that elephant at a time until you swallow the whole thing is really important. And if you can get there, then, the hard work is done. I mean, now you just have to focus on your business.
All right, so let's go into payroll errors due to manual data entry. I know that this might seem like a simple problem, but consequences can be huge. We were just talking about manual entry of any data can come with its mistakes. Well, what is the most common consequences for overpaying or underpaying your employees?
It's a great segue to what Mary just talked about, because the main thing we were stressing here is there's technology available today to eliminate manual entry of payroll data, of HR data, or any of this type of thing. And it's not expensive. I've used this term for years, that technology is the great equalizer, meaning there's technology today that's not that expensive that a small pest company could be using, as well as a multi-state company as well. So that's the great thing about this, is we want to outline all of these pitfalls and the things out there, but there are solutions. First of all, just being aware. Number two, making sure that you have good partners that you can work with from a technology standpoint, and then just making sure your employees are trained. So in this regard, with manual entry, there are still people who are taking the hours manually and putting them into spreadsheets and then trying to pay the payroll off of that. Or they're taking the hours and the jobs and they're putting them into a manual system, or putting them into a system, but they're doing it manually. And so that just creates all kinds of, as we said earlier, you can be paying people incorrectly. You could be filing taxes incorrectly. You could get your financials incorrect because your jobs aren't correct. So those are things I think that can easily be solved by using technology. And if you're using a CRM system like FieldRoutes or Service Titan or any of these other CRM systems out there, and you then integrate that with a payroll company, it makes it a lot easier. You don't have to rekey that information. It comes on in. And then as Mary said too, because she's putting on her CPA hat, if you also then integrate that with a QuickBooks or a Sage Intacct or an Acumatica or any other kind of accounting system, you've eliminated all the areas where you could actually have mistakes happen. And it's going to happen anytime you have manual. So education, use of technology, seeing where you can integrate your systems to make them work more efficiently. All of that is not an expensive endeavor. It's just a smart way to run your business.
I know that there often is some hesitation when it comes to technology.
Mhm.
This is the way we've always done it. And there is a bit of a learning curve, but once you get the hang of it, it allows you to be able to work on the business as opposed to in the business, as we always like to say
Exactly.
here. Yeah.
Exactly. I was talking with someone in a similar business just yesterday, and he also has grown very rapidly. He has grown from basically having 4 million in revenue to over 20 million in revenue in 3 years.
Wow.
Big growth.
Wow. Yeah.
And he's using our system as well as another technology CRM in the industry. By biting the bullet initially for him, learning the system, getting past this is different. We haven't always done this, but getting past that. In fact, he was just saying, Kathey, I hated that I waited so long, but we were able to scale from 4 million to 20 million because now we have this system in place. It takes us minutes to hire an employee versus the time it took before. And it takes minutes to process payroll versus the time it did before. So it's not always easy to do it. And once you get over that hurdle, embrace it. Make sure your employees understand the value of it, and then go with it, because it will benefit you not only in helping your business grow, but also, as we've just outlined today, there are some real pitfalls involved if you don't do it correctly.
What a success story. Good for them. That's incredible. It's hard to get buy-in from your employees sometimes. It's hard to take that leap. I'm glad they did that, and I'm glad that they found success with it. I know we've talked a lot about compliance. We talked about avoiding mistakes, but I'd love to pivot to the positive. How do you build a people first strategy? And how is HR the secret to that growth?
Compliance will keep you out of trouble.
Mhm.
We have to be compliant. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. But the way you create growth and create a long lasting company is by putting people first. I mean, especially in the service industry, your people are your brand. They're the ones who are out there working with the customers. They're the ones who they see. They don't know who the CEO is for the most part. They don't know who the EVP or the chief growth. They don't know us. They know the customer service representatives. They know the technicians. You've got to find a way to put the people first and to make them feel valued, because when they go out and customers see them and they see a happy employee, they say, oh, they must have a really good business because this guy seems like he really likes his job. How can you do that? Well, obviously, all the things we've talked about: fair pay, seamless onboarding, transparent policies, letting them know, what is their career path. All these things lead to retention. But what else does that create? Well, you need a culture. You need a culture of engagement, a culture that makes the employees feel like they're important. As Kathey was talking about with our CEO, he's great at that, and it's very cool that he does it. But what are some other things that we've seen? Your technicians are out in the field all the time. Sometimes they're working alone all day long, and they don't really get to interact with the rest of the teams. We create a recognition award, which, if you get great reviews, you get this recognition award, whether it's money or whether it's just some goofy little trophy that people pass around from team to team. Those are ways that you can not only create more of a team building environment, but also a little bit of a competitive nature surrounding customer service, which I think is really cool, especially in field service industry, because you've probably got a lot of people out there who are probably competitive in nature. So it really makes it kind of fun. Doing things like that makes a happy workforce. And one of the things that really creates that you don't really think about is a way to get new apprentices, new long-term employees, because everybody knows everybody in every industry. You're connected to the people you went to training with. You're connected to the people who do the same thing you do at other companies. So if you're creating and fostering an industry or a company where you have employees who really like coming there, who say, yeah, man, I won this award this week, or I got, $100 spiff, or whatever it is, they're going to tell their friends that. Next thing you know, you're going to have a company that's growing, not just by marketing and not just by word of mouth, but because you've got great employees who are promoting you every day. Engaged employees, you create better service, and they ultimately elevate your brand.
This is the reason I wanted to start with the Tommy Mello example, because he has grown his business really with the foundation of people first. The type of people he recruited, the type of people he hires, how he interacts with employees, the things that he provides them to grow and to learn. It's more than just having happy employees, or some people think touchy-feely things. Doing the right things, hiring the right people will improve your employee retention. It will improve your client retention. From a financial standpoint, not only will you have a happy employee base and happy client base, you're going to have a happy financial outlook, because your business will be stronger and better. And so I guess one of the things that as we want to impart with you guys today is, yes, we gave you some practical, hopefully, things on how you can avoid some of the pitfalls. But we also wanted to share with you what are the things that you need to do as a business owner to make sure you're in compliant, make sure that you're growing your business, but then think beyond that. What are the ways that you can ensure people's success? How you can put your people first? Because in doing so, you will actually ensure that your business is on a great foundation for growth, not only in the short term, but in the years to come.
Well said. Kathey Palmer, Mary Leveridge, thank you both for coming on and having this conversation with us today. Great conversation.
Thank you. We enjoyed it.